Welcome to this video, where we'll talk about decoding the disciplines and students as partners, uniting two SOTL strands. I'm Jared McBrady. I'm an assistant professor of history at SUNY Cortland.
Hi, I'm Holly Pelnar. I am a recent graduate of the Department of Psychological Science at Carthage College.
Hi, I'm Leslie Cameron. I'm a professor of psychological science at Carthage College.
I'm David Pace. I'm a professor emeritus of history at Indiana University. So we're going to be combining two methods today in a very short amount of time. We're going to be using decoding the disciplines connected with students as partners. So we don't have time to talk very much about decoding the disciplines. Let me just point out a couple of things. The process begins by looking for bottlenecks, places where students have trouble doing the basic task required in a course. And then we define what students need to do to be able to get past that. We model that for students, we practice, we deal with emotional blocks, we assess their learning, and we share with colleagues what's happening. This turns out to be more difficult than we may think because much of what our students need to know is so natural to us that we don't teach it. We just jump over, we're not even aware that we're doing it. And so we've developed a decoding interview process by which several faculty members interview the teacher about what exactly a student has to do to get past those places where many students have difficulty. Now, we're going to be using that in a different way today because the original model was faculty interviewing faculty. But in these projects, students are being trained in the decoding interview, and they are interviewing other students. And so that's what we'll be looking at today.
The second approach, in addition to decoding the disciplines that we're using, is the students as partners, which we understand in the way that Cook-Sather and colleagues have defined it. That is, as a reciprocal process through which all participants have the opportunity to contribute equally, although not necessarily in the same ways, to curricular or pedagogical conceptualization, decision-making, implementation, investigation, or analysis. Following the work of Peter Felton and his colleagues, here we work with students as partners in SOTL decoding projects. Students, in this case, contribute their unique perspective and complete aspects of the research that are developmentally appropriate for them. Our own contributions as faculty are reciprocally bound to our students in a way that's different from traditional mentoring models. In this model, students are partners and stakeholders in this work. In the project that Holly and I will tell you a little bit about today, we're working in I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I've been interested for several years in trying to help students communicate more clearly about graphical data. An example of the sort of graph that students need to be able to describe in a cognitive psychology class is demonstrated in the slide here. This graph was generated from data collected by the students in online laboratories and shows performance in a short-term memory experiment. And after some early work in my trying to think about how to help students communicate more clearly about data, I discovered that what was fundamentally problematic was the students' ability to simply describe data. And at that point, I became aware of decoding the disciplines and recognized that what I was dealing with was a bottleneck. So in the first instance, I interviewed faculty to decode how they describe and interpret graphical data. And although this was very helpful in order to articulate to students the process by which an expert goes through the process of reading a graph, we decided it'd be helpful to try and meet students where they are and understand how they currently read graphs. So at this point, we decided to involve student partners to get their perspective and have them collect data from other students on the assumption that students might be more candid in an interview with peers. And now Holly's going to tell you a little bit about her role as a student partner in this project.
So as a student partner in this project, I learned about the decoding process and how to conduct decoding interviews with students. We interviewed students both to assess the efficacy of the decoding interviews in novice populations and also to get a better idea of the steps or lack thereof that students utilize when looking at a graph. In terms of efficacy, we found that decoding interviews were successful with student participants. The level of metacognition required in decoding interviews was new to the students, and therefore many actually struggled to express their thoughts. These interviews ranged from 4 to 20 minutes long, compared to the hour-long faculty interviews. Also, conversations with faculty participants flowed fairly seamlessly, while students often needed a lot of prompting. Nonetheless, these interviews provided a great deal of insight into the student perspective and strategies. If you're interested in more details about our results, there will be a link at the end of this presentation.
And in my case, in the field of teacher education, I really focused on the student partners involved in the research. I teach a course on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in History for undergraduate students studying to become secondary history teachers. In this course, I work with these teacher candidates as they conduct Decoding the Disciplines research to understand the disciplinary thinking of their peers in an undergraduate history survey course. At the same time, I was researching just what exactly my teacher candidates were getting out of conducting this research. What benefits did they receive from the research? How was it preparing them for their future work as high school teachers? We started by learning how to conduct decoding interviews. The teacher candidates practiced with each other to decode their own disciplinary thinking when they selected credible sources to include in a history paper. Then teacher candidates deepened their knowledge of how historians evaluate textual sources through our reading and discussion of research literature. Next, teacher candidates conducted a decoding interview with undergraduate students in a world history survey course, prompting those students to decode their thinking used to choose sources for a history paper. Finally, teacher candidates worked together to analyze and interpret what they found in these interviews and plan instructional responses to their results. All the while this was going on, I continued to investigate and analyze what my teacher candidates were learning through this process. You can find out more information about my study in the video linked at the end of this presentation. And now that you have a sense of how we conducted and combined decoding the disciplines and students as partners research, we'll talk a bit about the benefits we found from combining these approaches.
So being a student partner was beneficial to the decoding interviews because the interviews require some amount of vulnerability on the side of the interviewee, as the point of the interviews is to dissect the understanding and knowledge of the participant. As I said before, this level of metacognition is often uncomfortable for students, and for this reason, we were concerned that having a faculty member interviewing a student would bring about a power dynamic that would leave students feeling intimidated or uncomfortable, preventing them from truly expressing their thoughts. As a student interviewer, I was seen as a peer who could relate to their experience. For this reason, participants felt a lot more comfortable sharing details with me. For example, their lack of effort or understanding of a certain topic. In some cases, participants also criticize courses for a lack of time spent reviewing these key skills. The participants most likely would not have felt comfortable sharing these details had I been a faculty member interviewing them instead of a student.
And from a faculty perspective, one of the benefits to the research findings of working with students, particularly in SOTL research, working as with student partners in SOTL, is that the students give us a unique perspective. As we're more removed from that student experience, it can be difficult for us to appreciate kind of the where students are coming from. And so Holly was able to provide me with some insight into things like, for example, the motivation of students. So whereas I'm focused as an instructor on finding and trying to help students with gaps in their knowledge, she was able to remind me that sometimes the problem was not a gap in the knowledge, but rather a motivation and a willingness to complete the task. So we found that there are great benefits to having this student voice in our SOTL research.
In addition to those benefits to the research findings, the student participants in this project and myself as a student partner both benefited on a personal level. For the participants, some individuals became more aware of their own mental processes while partaking in the decoding interviews. As a student partner, I was much more motivated to engage in this project because the topic was relevant to my own learning and that of my peers. I became much more conscious of my own mental processes and strategies. I started applying our findings to my own learning by modeling my thought processes after those in which the faculty described during their interviews. And outside of graph reading, I generally became more aware of how I think about and approach different academic tasks. Also, the partnership also dramatically improved my confidence. I began my involvement in the lab right after my freshman year and dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome. I questioned whether I was really bringing anything of value to the work. However, after engaging as students as partners work, I felt much more confident in my own abilities. As I grew much closer to my research advisor, I was able to discuss with Dr. Cameron um, her expectations of me versus my own unrealistically high expectations for myself. I was also able to speak more candidly with her about my own thoughts and academic experiences, which benefited both our research as well as helped me recognize the contributions that I brought to the work.
And I found too that my teacher candidates experienced many benefits from conducting decoding research. First, my teacher candidates developed their abilities to construct what Sunshine calls a theory of mind for their interviewed students. That is the ability to explain others' behavior in terms of underlying thoughts, their feelings, their desires, their intentions, something that we might call perspective taking or empathy. And conducting decoding research helped my teacher candidates more accurately craft theories of mind for their interviewed peers. Second, through decoding, my teacher candidates realized more fully the power of words as thinking tools and how lacking these words can pose a significant bottleneck to students' disciplinary thinking. Bain calls these mind tools, discipline-specific linguistic devices and discourse. Such cognitive tools and vocabulary sharpens disciplinary thinking in ways not possible without that vocabulary. Teacher candidates recognize the connection between words and thoughts in their interviewed students, noting places where not having the words to describe disciplinary thinking limited students' abilities to think, and other places where mastering discipline-specific words enabled students to actually think in discipline-specific ways. Further, teacher candidates then realized how important it was to teach these mind tools to their students if they wanted them to think in disciplinary specific ways. Additionally, many teacher candidates reported that the decoding paradigm was helpful to reflect on their own disciplinary thinking, and indeed some found that it sharpened their disciplinary thinking when they partnered with this research. One wrote, "This process of conducting and reflecting upon a decoding discipline interview made me a more confident historian." Finally, teacher candidates found this hands-on research experience to be an authentic learning opportunity that prepared them well for their future profession. Numerous teacher candidates referenced how they could transfer these research skills into their future work as teachers. So in short, what we found across both our cases was that these two research approaches, decoding the disciplines and students as partners, were incredibly complementary. They strengthened the teaching and learning in both our disciplines with benefits to faculty and student partners alike. On a final note, I think it is important to stress, and I know Leslie would echo this as well, just what a joy it is to work with students in this capacity. Involving students as partners in decoding the disciplines research, working alongside our students, has reinvigorated our research programs and enlivened our classroom teaching.
So as you can tell, we're excited about all this. We hope you'll join us. You can go to the Decoding website and find more material. You can email me and contribute to this discussion and be part of the conversation. And you can look at the follow-up videos at this URL. Thank you very much. Love talking to you.